2005, it was my first full-time teaching job. And the school that I was at, a little rinky-dinky college, which actually closed last year, and they were absorbed by Boston College, Pine Manor College. In 2005, they were way ahead of the curve, and they were doing first-year experience. And this is some of what we did, but what was nice is that you had faculty, you had the dean, you had the president, you had student affairs, all seeing ourselves as a cohort of educators. So that's what I want you to sort of like think about. So you have political science, you have history, you have gender and women's studies. But for this Cardinal Foundation seminar, I want you to think of yourselves as a cohort of educators educating our first-year students. So it's happened here. I feel bad to have you do this, but we're going to play a little game. So get your papers out so that you can sign. All right, so I want to invite you to stand if you're able to. And if it's too hot and you don't want to stand, just raise your hand. So, not yet. Faculty being some of the worst students. I want to invite you to stand when I read the vision statement. If it's too hot or you're not able to, just raise your hand. So wait for it. Stand if you're a last child. A lost child, the baby, the final sibling. Give all these spoiled brats a round of applause. Okay, thank you. Stand if you can see ghosts, if you're able to see ghosts. Nobody has a sixth sense but me? Really? Okay. Stand if you've been in a car accident at some time in your life. And I want to say thank you to the people that are standing, because there's something about being in an accident that causes trauma to the body that doesn't go away. Right? So thank you. Stand if you like outdoors. That's why we're in the North Country, right? Thank you. Stand if you were born in another country.
Okay.
Thank you. Stand if you are shy. And I'm going to put my hand up because I'm very shy. And people don't know that. They're like, you're shy? I'm like, yes, I'm shy. All right, thank you, shy guys. Stand if you absolutely hate confrontation. I would not. Yes. All right, thank you. And lastly, stand if you like a good conflict. Stand if you like conflict. What? My three friends. I love conflict. I love discussion. I love it so much I got a PhD in it.
I learned so much about myself.
And other people. So thank you. So what we just did is that we, doing our work, define diversity. Right, so when you think about diversity, it is the range of human experiences. Some of them we can see, some of them we can't see. And this is in your class. Different thinking styles, different experiences. And there are some things that are missing from here. There are obvious things that we see, but there are some of the things that we don't see. So you always have to be cognizant of what we can see and what we can't see. So what I want to say to you, as you think about who your students are, you always have to dig deeper. As Sullivan Simon speaks about being intrusive, and I want you to feel comfortable with being intrusive. Intrusive, but with boundaries. Because you have to get to know who your students are, especially the parts of our students that are invisible. Because that's how we're able to serve them. Because what we're talking about is belonging. What we're talking about is not making our students feel welcome. So if you remember nothing that I said today, I want you to resonate with this. Welcoming and belonging are cousins. They're not twins, they're not the same. So belonging is that sense of feeling connected to something, feeling that you fit in, that you're a part of, that you belong. And that's what we want our students to feel. And when they feel connected, that's when they feel passionate, that's when they can find their voice, that's when they can be their full, true self. So I just put some other things there for grins, right? Equity, but belonging is really important for you to think about. So I call this the word from our sponsors. One of the things that I wanted us, when I started in 2019, but once the work started ramping up, I thought instead of us just saying DEI, because that means nothing, right? My work is in anti-oppression. And I really wanted us to start thinking about how we can serve our students. So we came up with the acronym ALL SET. S is for student-centered, E is for equity-minded, and T is for trauma-informed. So this is a word from our sponsors. So the S, when we're student-centered, our students feel that sense of belonging. So our students need to be the axis on which everything spins. And for some people, that's different. It's a different mindset. But the higher ed landscape has changed significantly. And we are here to serve our students. So the idea of being student-centered really helps our students to feel they belong, to feel connected. And I'll make sure that you get a copy of this. So what is student-centered? We know that right now our students are disconnected. With everything that has happened last year, they're angry, they're tired, they're traumatized. That's the part of who's coming to us. So we have to do what we need to make them feel connected, to make them feel that they belong, to make them feel not as though they're sort of like the world, but to make them understand that we're here to serve them, to serve their needs for them to get a degree, for them to get a better job, right? For them to probably be in a different class than their families. So student-centered, making the students in the center or the axis of what we do. And one of the dimensions of being student-centered is looking at our campus climate. And for some colleges, the campus climate can be good, it can be bad, it can be downright ugly. And we have to always understand that the climate isn't just what happens around the college. It also is what happens in the classroom. So for students, the classroom is where they can take the temperature on what is happening in their lives and how they experience the college. Okay. So our campus climate can actually be an agent of dehumanization for our students. And I come back to this. We have to remember who our students are. So these are I like to say, this is the fish in the pond. The climate, we have to prepare the pond for our students. And that's what we're doing today, preparing the pond. So equity-minded. I talked about what I want you to lead with and what I want to resonate. Very often we talk about equity, as though equity is this thing. But equity is actually the end, right? That's where we want to get to. But to really understand equity, you have to know inequity. And I'll say that again. To truly understand equity, you have to understand inequity in all its forms. And what I want to remind us is that inequity is not a competitive sport. It's not a competitive sport. So some people might say, oh, racism is worse than sexism. They're all oppressive. They all oppress the human condition. So inequity in all forms are problematic. What I will say is that for some colleges, they might have what I call a big bet, right? There might be that issue that keeps coming back to bite them on the butt. Oh, you're recording me, so I have to watch now. There are the things that keep coming back that are problematic, and that's your big bet. But it doesn't mean that you have other forms of inequity that you also don't need to address. Does that make sense? So I want to start drooning, and I want to see if anybody has any comments, any thoughts, or any questions.
I guess I have a question, and this isn't a question that you can answer necessarily, but thinking about teaching in these first year seminars and first year students and creating an inclusive, supportive, equity-minded class, and then we send them into other classes that aren't. And how, and I guess for me, that's the concern that I have. I know it's shifting the culture.
That's such a good question, because as our friends at this table said, when you elicit the passion, what you're actually preparing, Freire talked about that, you are preparing activists. So in preparing those first year students by doing equity-minded practices, they're going to be agents of their social reality. So should they get into oppressive situations, guess what they'll be doing? They will be addressing the oppression, because they will not be voiceless pawns that people can just do anything. I'm not going to say that they'll become rebel rousers, but they will be active agents, and that's what we want our first-year students to do. Because our students are also going to help to change the dynamic of the institution. And I love that question, because one of the things I say is that because of where I sit, I'm an activist. So I'm an activist administrator, but I can't throw stones at the house because I live in the house. But we can teach our students where to throw the stones to break the structure. Does that answer the question? So the last word from our sponsors, trauma-informed. I want you to assume that everybody that you meet has experienced or is experiencing some form of trauma. And that's the invisible or the invisibility of diversity. When you look at me, you don't know whether I'm a survivor of sexual molestation. I might be or I might not be. That might be a part of my trauma. So I always want you to assume that your students all have trauma. And when your teaching is trauma-informed, you're coming in not just with a basic understanding of trauma, but you're coming in with a sensitivity. So last year for Black Solidarity Day, remember we had Kevin Harding, and he talked, Kevin Hardy, I always call him Harding, Kenneth Harding, and he talked about moving from awareness to sensitivity. So when we're trauma-informed, we're thinking, oh, it's not, what's wrong with that student? Why is that student doing this? Instead, you ask, what has happened to you? And the students that are coming back to us, we have to be asking, when you see something, what is happening right now? Because for some of our students, as well as some of us, this trauma is real and it's happening in real time. We're not therapists. I'm not saying you have to be their therapist, but you have to have that level of sensitivity. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Why do we forget that trauma exists in our students? Because I assume that most of us somehow have at least the idea, the vague idea that our students come from a vulnerable place. But however, we forget about it. The question is why?
Yeah.
What's going on with us?
And I think that's some of what Freire talks about, the dehumanization. Because I think if we can humanize each other, but also our students, and not seeing our students as receptacles that we have to bank information in, then it changes who the student is, and we see them as a human being.
I think it's our whole society. I mean, I think we treat each other as like robots meant to achieve whatever goal it is. I mean, we forget the humanity.
So I want to shift away from what we're talking about to get into this idea of the humanizing pedagogy. So I have to admit, when I was a professor, I said that I'm Freirean. You know, I was introduced to Freire very early in my graduate studies in the 90s. And it changed the way that I teach. Because I was taught in a classroom that was so oppressive. I remember Professor Job, class started at 8, and that's when he started teaching. And if you came in at 8:01, he was on the blackboard, the chalkboard. Remember the chalkboard? He was writing. And you couldn't ask a question, you had to sit and try to figure out what the hell he was talking about. Now that's some cuckoo bananas BS. But that's how I was taught in most of my college until I got to grad school and was introduced to a humanizing pedagogy. So I'm going to send this snapshot to you, but I want to spend some time exploring some of the main ideas that I pulled out about the humanizing pedagogy, which for some of us is a little different. So the idea is that we have to be in solidarity with our students, meaning that if we're going to help them to be free, then we have to be side by side with them, which means that's where the intrusion comes in. You got to know what they need. We can't make the assumption that we know what our students need. So we have to be in relationship. And it doesn't mean that you have to invite them to dinner or that you have to invite them to your house. The relationship is just that you have to let the students know that you see them and that they matter. That's the humanization. So it talks about the co-intentional education. I always remember that at the beginning of my class, I would give my students a blank syllabus, and they would go bananas. Dr. C, what's up? And I would ask them, at the end of the class, what do you want to do? So we have the student learning outcomes, but I would ask them, what are some of the things you're curious about? And those were the best classes I taught, because they helped me to understand what they were curious about. And by the second class, I had an idea of what I wanted to give, but I also included some of what they were saying that they wanted, and that's the co-intentional education, because they're the experts on their lives. Destroying anything that humanizes the students. And by anything, I mean anything and everything, including our attitudes and our mindsets. So this is a whole shift. It truly is a shift. I think one of the most important things about the humanizing pedagogy, and I know for some people this could be difficult, you have to get rid of the sage on the stage. And that's where Freire talks about the banking. So, you know, a lot of people, the students come with their pen and their notebook, and they sit and they write. And that is dehumanizing. Instead, the teacher is the teacher, but the teacher is also the learner. And the student is also the student, but the student is also the teacher. So it's like the teacher teaches the student teaches the teacher, the student teaches other students, right? And also themselves. So there has to be this cycle of learning happening in the classroom. And it makes the classroom interesting, and it makes the classroom non-oppressive. Try it. Yes.
How can you do that?
How can you do that?
Yeah, because I'm the teacher. I mean, the student cannot know more than what I know. That's why I'm the teacher, right? So how can he be my teacher now?
So you are the teacher, you're the content expert. So you're thinking about the content expert, and one of the differences between you and the students is that you have a grasp and a depth and breadth of knowledge as it relates to the content. Now, in terms of education and learning, it's not just about the content, but it's also about experiences. So one of the interesting things that can happen is as you are delivering the content, a student might be able to give an example in a way that you can't. So you always have to leave that space open for things like that to happen. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
Yeah. So it's not, we're not saying that you're no longer the content expert because you are. But I think if we lower that differential, that power differential, and we allow that to happen in the classroom, something magical happens. And I'll tell you what, when I started off teaching, I used to teach like Dr. Joe. And I was, well, that's on, so I won't say what I thought to myself. It wasn't good. It was not good. It wasn't good for me and it wasn't good. But once I started teaching in a way that was not oppressive, I started enjoying that classroom. It was fun. And thank you for that question. So they talk about dialogue. And so we talk about the intellectual. And Shauna, here's the activism. When we teach in that way, our students become activists. And they want to do things, they want to solve problems. But what is interesting is that we have that cycle of discovery. So there's the intellectual, where we can think about what we're teaching, there's action, we reflect on what we're doing, and then that active discovery. So this is true, I think what they call praxis. There's theory, there's reflecting on theory, but then there's doing something about what you're teaching. And that's where the students, they get engaged because they feel it's not just that thing in the book, but that's where their content and that's where their learning comes alive. So at Nova Southeastern University, where I got my master's and my PhD, they call us academics because most of the graduates, we went out to work with the United Nations, some with NATO, doing a lot of work around peace building and conflict resolution. And what they taught us to do is to take the theory and put the theory into practice. So we're practitioners that are using the theory. And before I forget, I put these on your tables. And this is an interesting study about belonging in college. So I want you to each have one of those. So we're doing good with time.
Just very briefly, I plan in my first session or two to actually explain the hierarchy of the college. And so, okay, you can tell me about something, but there's a chair, and there's a dean, there's a provost. These are all like people you can talk to in email, because I didn't know anything about that as a student.
And I love that you said that because that was a part of what I wanted to talk about.
And
helping the
also,
students to understand structures because they don't understand how institutions operate. So we have about 20 more minutes. And I just want us to spend a little time on a high impact practice. By show of hands, how many people are familiar with high impact practices? And you probably already do them. So I'm probably show you something that you already know, and you'll be like, duh, Michelle, we already knew this. But I wanted to talk a little bit about project-based learning. By show of hands, how many people use project-based learning in their classes right now? So why are we doing this then? Are you familiar with the essential question? Yes? No? Maybe so? So let's talk a little bit about project-based learning because I think this is what can really ignite some of that passion in your students. So the thing about project-based learning is that you come up with a problem and then you have the students solve or try to solve a problem, and it begins with the essential question. So you give them, just like we did at the beginning, we gave them the problem, and then you came up with the essential question. And once you have the essential question, so why don't we spend a little time looking at each other's essential questions? So I'm going to put yours here. Okay, so what I want you to do is to just stand. Let's stand, and I want us to take, with your group, we're going to do a gallery walk. And this is a really good exercise that you can use with your students. So as you have the students work in groups, you put the essential questions up, and then you invite the students to just walk around and look at other people's essential questions and put a star on whether you like it or so. So take these and you can just put 1 dot if you like it, 2 dots if you love it, 3 if you really like it. Talk a little bit more about, so this was one hand practice, project-based learning. There's also challenge-based learning, which is so much fun, in that you can have the students create a challenge. And with the challenge, instead of it being a project, what they come up with is a challenge or a statement to address the problem. Right, so they start with an essential question. So they start with a problem, and then they continue with an essential question, and then they end with a challenge, which is a statement about how they're going to address the problem. The thing about these hand-packed practices is that they're collaborative. So you get students from a number of different identities to be working together. So when we talk about inclusion, it isn't including everybody, but it really is addressing the different types of diversity and engaging with it. So that is where students really get to hear from each other. These hand-packed practices are also interdisciplinary because you have students from different disciplines speaking to each other. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit more as we're coming to the end is what are some empathy-minded principles you can use in your classroom. So Shauna just asked me if I use Colombian hypnosis. And I was like, were you looking at my notes? So I wanted to show you just a few little activities that you can use in the class. Colombian hypnosis is an excellent exercise that you can use with your students to have them talk about power, right? And as we're talking about systems, I assume you'll be having a discussion about power in the classroom. So Shauna, do you want to demonstrate with me? So Colombian hypnosis is you're using your index finger to control or move the other person. And I am going to, why don't you do it?
I use the whole hand,
Use the whole hand, okay.
but that can be sort of aggressive.
All right,
So should I lay out rules or should we
just do. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about it after. So, what did you notice?
Power and control.
But in what ways?
Listening.
That was energetic.
Listening.
Okay. What else did you notice? So when I was being hypnotized, what did you notice about the use of power? You didn't notice anything?
It was all over the place. It was like up and down and then fast and slow.
I was crawling on my knees.
I didn't see where it was going to.
what you were doing because you were under the contract that you would follow the
Right, so,
Well, we both were.
right, yes, but I was following her, and you, what word did you use?
It was subordinating.
Yeah.
And when, it's interesting when you use Colombian hypnosis, that you really feel how people use power. Because sometimes people have others dragging on the floor like a snake. They have them jumping up and down. They have them running around the room. And then others can just use their power with. To say, you know what, I'll just.
Can I just say how kind? That is the kindest I have ever been treated in Colombian hypnosis ever.
And you just put somebody to have a seat, and so there are activities that you can do, and then have students talk about it, but then use that as an example of how they experience power, either in the classroom or in the college. Because some of the things that professors do have students jumping up and down. Right across it.
Well, I think it was interesting
And
that,
Shauna, you can take it.
when Shauna was, when you were following Shauna, that you cooperated with it. And I think that speaks to her sort of the person and trust being blocked together.
We know the structure.
Right? And that
Right.
you didn't reject, you didn't refuse, you participated.
And the question is, why? And that's what we also have to have our students engage in that conversation. Why am I dragging on the ground and crawling on my knees and following somebody who's obviously oppressing me? Right? So I think that's a good activity to do with students and to have that conversation about power. Did I see another hand?
Can you spell what you said? Like,
Colombian hypnosis.
like the country.
Like a country, yeah. Colombian. Go with the accent. Colombian hypnosis.
And if you need someone to come into your classroom, maybe.
And Shauna would be. And this actually is something that I learned in the theater practice. So, which is one of the things that I also wanted to say. Another practice that you can use in your class is using theater. And we have somebody from improv at the back, we have somebody from theater. It would have been nice if for the Cardinal Foundation seminar, that you can do some of that theater progression, because one of the things you need to be able to do with your students is to get them comfortable in their bodies. Before they speak, they can act, they can move, and then they find voice. I don't want to give you more work, but I was trained by Augusto Boal's son, Julian. If you have time and you want to do this, I could come in and show you with Shauna's help, if you'd like to. Because it really helps to lower the oppression in the classroom. So the difference is how the power was used, right? So instead of having power over, I try to have power with her. So instead of having her dragging, you know, I'm thinking it might be nice to just have you rest and just chill out for a little bit. Because it's hot in here, I don't want you jumping up and down. So power, I had power with her. And that's, remember when prayer talks about being in solidarity, I felt that I wanted to be in solidarity with her. So in the exercise, I couldn't speak to her, but I made an assumption for what she needed because of the climate of where we were. So for you as the professor, sometimes you may not be able to ask, and this is where equity comes in. We may not be able to ask our students what they want, but we can assume or have some idea of what our students need. And before they ask, especially if they don't have voice, we need to offer. Does that make sense? So a part of the desensitization with equity is that before somebody asks for something, if we understand that it is a need, we offer. Okay.
So I'm looking at this experience, and maybe I'm kind of an outsider maybe to this, but I can see some students possibly being very hesitant to join these activities. Maybe there's been some traumatic experiences in their lives. They are uncomfortable with certain people maybe in an audience and don't want to participate. So the question, I guess, is like, you know, how much as we as professors need to encourage activities versus finding alternate activities for those that maybe are sensitive to the structures that we place in the classroom. Because, like I said, they may not feel very good about doing some of the things that we have no bad intentions of doing to them, you know?
And that's an important question. So there are 3 words: trigger, shock, warning. It's not troubling your students, but you have to give trigger or shock warnings when you do activities. Because like as we go back to diversity, you don't know, and to trauma informed, you never know what trauma somebody has and what can trigger that. Anything that you're doing that you think or that you're showing, even if you don't think it might, just give a trigger shock warning and allow people to participate, because students also have the right to be silent or not participate. So I thank you for that question. So also remember to use your trigger shock warning. And I'm now 1 minute over time. So I want to say thank you for your attention. This was like, we're in Hades. So hard to say. Thank you for your time and have a really successful semester. In fact, have a transformative semester.